right, is everybody feeling okay? You have what you need to receive some Torah, to learn some Torah? Okay. All right. I'll start with a little poem. Fire and Ice by Robert Frost. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. Jewish tradition holds that God tested Abraham 10 times. It's not an accident that among all the many stories and tests of our founding father and founding family, 2 of these tests appear today and tomorrow on day 1 and day 2 of Rosh Hashanah, the most high-traffic days of the Jewish calendar. It's like our ancestors are begging us every year to look at our world through the lens of these stories and learn their lessons anew. So, there's a lot to talk about in our world, but I think we should first spend some time with the Torah that we just read. Does that sound good? Okay, good. So for the privilege of learning Torah in this new year together, Shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Okay. So for decades before Isaac's miraculous conception, not immaculate, but miraculous nonetheless, our protagonists, Abraham and Sarah, tried to have their own children, as we have discussed, to fulfill God's promise that Abraham's progeny should be as numerous as the stars of the sky and the sands of the sea. And when that proved impossible, Sarah gave her husband her handmaiden, Hagar the Egyptian, and said, "Sire a child with our handmaiden." And lo, that child was born and was named Yishmael, God will hear. So literarily, Hagar plays the role of the outsider. She is an immigrant. She is a person of low social status or outsider. And it's reflected in her very name, Hagar. In Hebrew, the ger, the stranger, the person who's here, but not from here. When Hagar, the Egyptian, gets pregnant, rather than feeling like she has helped fulfill God's promise, Sarah's shame becomes even more pronounced, which in turn causes her to oppress and afflict and abuse Hagar. And it is those same words, inui, avdut, oppression, abuse, that are used in the book of Exodus to describe what the Egyptians do to the enslaved Israelites. So the text is not even subtle about the idea that what goes around comes around, especially when it comes to the way that we treat gerim. Fast forward 13 years. Sarah gets pregnant. Isaac is born. And Sarah wants Hagar and Ishmael gone once and for all and says, "Abraham, make it happen." Abraham is understandably, as you saw, distressed by the prospect of exiling his firstborn son and his mother, Hagar, who he obviously cares for very deeply. So Abraham does what all biblical prophets do and goes to God. And God responds enigmatically, as you saw. In everything Sarah tells you, Shema bikola, listen to her voice. This is the hinge. This is the test. When I read, listen to her voice, I read, hear her agony. Hear the feeling of scarcity and protectiveness that she feels in this moment. Hear the years of disappointment and shame and humiliation, which strangely don't just disappear now that she has a child of her own. If anything, it all comes whooshing back in a flood of memories and hormones of new motherhood. Abraham, not will you obey, but will you listen? When she cries, will you hold her? When she rages, will you let her? But when she asks you to do something that expands the circle of hurt and humiliation and shame, something unethical, can you also gently say to her, I love you, I hear you, I get where that feeling is coming from, but no. So we don't get to hear Abraham's inner monologue. We only get to see that he has muscled through his discomfort and he obeys her instructions. He places a skin of water on Hagar's shoulder, gives her a piece of bread, and pushes them out into the wilderness, probably to die. And this is the precursor to tomorrow's story, in which God instructs Abraham to take his one remaining son up a mountain and offer him as a sacrifice. This time, there is no protest. We watch as Abraham and Isaac go up the mountain together. We see Isaac's confusion. Here are all the implements for making a sacrifice, but Father, where's the animal? And we watch his painful realization as he understands that being the favored son did not spare him the exact same fate as his brother Ishmael in the end. One capitulation led to another. And the angel of God, of course, calls out Abraham, pulling him out of his trance of obedience at the very last moment, and points out a ram in the thicket to sacrifice instead of Isaac. They don't go home and laugh about it later. Isaac, at this point, disappears from the story completely. They don't walk down the mountain together. The next reference to Sarah is at her own funeral, from which the rabbis deduce later that she heard that her husband had taken her one beloved, miraculous child up a mountain to sacrifice him, and she died of grief. And the sound of the shofar's staccato moan, which Jan did so poignantly up here, is the sound of her heartbreak. That's what that is. And it's the sound of the heartbreak of every mother whose child was made a sacrifice to forces more powerful than her love. So I've talked about heartbreak before on this holiday, because the theme of Rosh Hashanah is Hayom Harat Olam. Today, the world is born anew. But I have a confession to make. Wrong holiday, I know. The excitement and hope that I want to feel on this holiday has for years been eroded by a kind of heartbreak at the state of the world. My sense of hopefulness at the prospect of a fresh start in the new year isn't gone. It's just had to make room for heartbreak. Perhaps I relate to Sarah. I fear that I cannot prevent my children from being sacrificed to forces greater than my love. My heartbreak is anticipatory loss and grief. It's the sense of loss that comes with feeling like the forces contributing to, I don't know, climate change, war, authoritarianism, gun violence, white Christian nationalism, ecocide, and the list goes on, are rapacious and unrelenting and will win. And it might not be permanent, but it will do real damage and for a long time. But it is just a feeling. And feelings are often wrong. Feelings aren't truth. They're real, but they're not truth. And I hope to God that I'm wrong. And so every day I wake up and I thank God for my life, and I behave like what I do matters. Like it matters existentially. As a rabbi, as a mother, as a citizen of the world, like it matters existentially that we have spaces to feel buoyed by a tradition whose moral wisdom and spiritual practices and obsession with justice have helped shape our people for thousands of years and survive times just like this. And I am devoted to that with every ounce of my being. But it sits next to heartbreak. And so I just want to affirm for anyone who might be feeling similarly, heartbreak's a legitimate emotion, even on this day. Everyone in our story walks away with a broken heart. Maybe the lesson that we learn is not to silence or deny our heartbreak, but to let it crack us open, to listen to it, to let it be our teacher, so that we don't expand the circle of pain and heartbreak. Nitzan Joy Gordon is a leader in the Israeli and Palestinian peace-building organization Together Beyond Words, and she has a phrase that she taught us a few weeks ago. Pain that is not transformed is transmitted. Pain that is not transformed is transmitted. So what if our test is to transform our heartbreak so that we don't transmit it? In both of our stories, we see Abraham do the exact opposite. We see him harden his heart and override his conscience, something for which we say a collective vidui, or confession, on Yom Kippur, striking our chests for the sin of being hard-hearted. Abraham hardens his heart to imagine that his own flesh and blood, his son and his son's mother, could be the other and could be sacrificed to preserve his family, namely Isaac and Sarah. Rabbis over the generations have praised Abraham's faithfulness in obeying her words, but it seems to me that in Abraham's compliance in both of these tests, the result, ironically and devastatingly, is the destruction of the one thing he was trying to protect: his family. All of them. What we do to others, to the other, or allow to be done to others because we feel threatened, because we think it will protect us, it comes back around to us eventually. When we harden our heart against them, imagining that it will protect us, as we see in this story, that sense of safety is at best temporary and ultimately an illusion. There is no them and us. There's only us. All of us. Surviving or destroying ourselves on this pale blue dot in the solar system together. And we know this as Jews. We know the reality of our interconnectedness. We know how what happens to them and us ultimately is one and the same. Before I could recite any verses of Torah, I could recite the famous passage from the German pastor Martin Niemöller. I'm sure you know it. First they came for the communists, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist, and so on and so forth. And then they came for the Jews, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. The essential lesson of the Holocaust I learned as a kid was the world is saved when people speak up, when people listen to their conscience. Never again to saying about any group, they're expendable. Never again to applying different moral standards and rights to different groups of people. Never again to allowing bullies get away with it. Never again to dehumanization. Never again for us, and never again for anyone. It wasn't controversial. But when we feel threatened, it's precisely these moral muscles that quiver and atrophy. Our limbic brain gets hijacked, and we reflexively seek out who is to blame for our pain and make them pay, or at the very least neutralize the threat posed to us. I get where Sarah was coming from emotionally. It's an instinct developed in us to protect us in situations of mortal danger. It's an important one, but it is one that can be easily exploited. Will we have the self-awareness to know when our big feelings, our rage, our fear, our sense of victimhood, our sense of injustice is causing us to make choices that don't solve the problem, but mask it or expand it or put it on someone else? It's in these moments we need someone to listen to us, Shema B'kolah, to hear our heartbreak, to validate our pain, to prevent us from acting on our worst impulses of revenge and blame, because when we're in that place, it's not generally when we do our best thinking. And more importantly, when we act from that place of fear and rage and blame and pain, it tends to be where we do things that we later come to regret, and that can take years or generations or millennia to fix if we can at all. Which is why our tradition, over 3,500 years, has produced verses, chapters, tractates, rituals, holidays designed to train and hone our hearts for precisely moments like the ones that are most likely to cause us to close down in fear. Lema'an tizkaru, so you will remember. Genesis introduces us to the idea of the ger, the stranger, when it is someone else. Exodus shows us ourselves as gerim, the oppressed minority, the stranger in a strange land. Leviticus tells us what to do when we're finally free again, and tells us you will not oppress the immigrant, the stranger, because you've been there. Deuteronomy goes so far as to say, you will love the immigrant and the stranger, the person most likely to be scapegoated when we feel threatened. Ki gerim hayitem, because you've been there. And we have been. And we do know what it's like. And we don't need to look far to see the disastrous effects of buying into the idea that we will be safe if we could just make those bad people go away, or control them in a way we would never accept for ourselves or our children. This kind of thinking has justified our own country's treatment of Native Americans, African Americans, Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, Mexican Americans, communists, queer people, trans people, immigrants, and their families. It's a partial list. There's a battle happening right now for the soul of our country, I think we all know. And I feel like the battleground is precisely this question. Will we invest in the structures and institutions and laws that protect all of us, even when it's uncomfortable? Or will we buy into the illusion that safety can come from identifying a them to erase and silence? And for those of us who care about our Israeli brothers and sisters and Palestinian neighbors, we've witnessed for the past 2 years the abject horrors of what comes from seeing another group as a them, as nefarious, as taking up space that should be ours, inherently prone to evil, in need of elimination. The horrific results of such thinking you can still see in the burned out homes in Kibbutz Nir Oz, or Kibbutz Be'eri, or Kibbutz Kfar Aza, and in the harrowing stories of the hostages who have come back to share them, the fact that there are still hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza, the fact that there are hostages, including children, including babies who were plucked from their homes and murdered in the tunnels beneath Gaza. The threat of violent Islamic extremism is real, and we should not minimize it. And the threat right now for those who care about Israel, as I do, as I know many in this community deeply do, is violent Jewish extremism and its enablers. The same eliminationist beliefs that call for all Jews to disappear from the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, it is mirrored at the highest levels of government in Israel by ministers who have used that kind of language to justify, even proudly, the IDF's flattening of Gaza, the burning of Gaza, the starving of Gaza, the making of Gaza and much of the West Bank, for that matter, uninhabitable for Palestinians. And I was doing air quotes around all those words because that's not me editorializing. Those are direct quotes from some of those ministers. And it's not just rhetoric. They're describing the reality they are creating as we speak. As we speak. Our religion permits and even obligates us to self-defense when we are under attack. But this even according to IDF commanders, is no longer a war of self-defense. It has become a war of ideology, driven by those very cabinet ministers, enabled by the prime minister himself over the objections of the vast majority of Israel's population, not to mention the families of the hostages still held in Gaza right now who feel utterly abandoned by their own government. We Jews carry the trauma of our history in our bodies. Israelis perhaps more than most. And these high-level cabinet ministers and the prime minister himself exploit that pain to implement a dangerous messianic fantasy. And this fantasy rejects the idea of two states with self-determination for two peoples that both legitimately call that land home, and replaces it with the idea of one state with Jewish sovereignty from the river to the sea, which they believe is the fulfillment of God's will and the Jewish people's final assurance of security. And this government is moving expeditiously toward that vision with the support of the United States. And I don't have to tell you that in that vision, Palestinians will not share rights equal to Jews. And if they succeed, it will be impossible to contest accusations of ethnic cleansing and apartheid if one can do that now. And they do all of this in the name of Jewish security, knowing how good those words feel to hear. And I imagine they believe it. But these messianic fantasies, and there have been a few over the course of Jewish history, they never end well for us. For those of us who care about Israel, we cannot co-sign on this. And I understand the feeling of, it's far away. I'd rather focus on issues where I feel we have more efficacy. I don't want to look. There's plenty to do here. And who has time to deal with the blowback, whether online or at work or from family or friends, for saying the wrong thing about such a sensitive and volatile topic? Let alone that putting yourself out there right now in this culture of political retribution and violence here in the United States can put a literal target on your back. I understand why anyone would not add their voice to the chorus on this issue. But we do the Jewish people and the Jewish state no favors by keeping our heads down as if we don't look, it's not happening. Because the consequences of empowering state-sponsored Jewish extremism imperil all of us. Not only Palestinians, and that would be bad enough, but Jewish Israelis as well, as young men come home in body bags every single day. And Jews around the world feel publicly afraid to be Jewish, lest someone who objects to Israel's actions, which obviously so do I, take them out on random passing Jews, which, to be clear, is anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism of this kind and worse is rising, but for me, the solution isn't to hide and let the most extreme voices speak for our people and define Judaism and Israel and Zionism, all words that I claim in my own way, but very differently. I would rather us be joyfully, proudly Jewish and make clear that violent Jewish extremism is a distortion of Judaism and a bastardization of Zionism and bad for Israel, and will ultimately be self-destructive. Honoring the very real history and present-day pain of our people need not and must not mean closing our eyes to the reality of the pain Palestinians have felt historically and the pain they are being caused by Jewish people right now. And that doesn't mean, this is important, it doesn't mean dismissing the role that their own leaders and failures have played in contributing to where we are, just as we can admit to the failures of our leaders over the course of history that have led us to where we are. It means holding grief and responsibility at the same time. It means knowing that pain that is not transformed will be transmitted. And we're watching that transmission happen on a catastrophic scale. And it would be easy for people on the ground to despair. But I'm encouraged I'm encouraged by those who know that action and hope can and must live alongside heartbreak. I'm encouraged when I think about Israelis and Palestinians who do every single day the hard work of transforming their pain into purpose. I think about groups like Women Wage Peace or Women of the Sun, both movements of Israeli and Palestinian women who, for the sake of their children, refuse to demonize the other and organize rallies and marches and demonstrations, often over the literal walls that separate them. And they're part of a much, much larger network of peacemakers who have not given up on the idea of coexistence and who feel in their very bones that the key to peace is not eliminating the other or controlling or dominating the other, but hearing the other as a necessary first step to being heard themselves so that they together could imagine a different future, one in which the security of all is bound up in the dignity and freedom of all. This kind of capacious heart and vision can be hard to hold on to when we feel threatened. And that's why our tradition prepares our hearts with rituals like the one we just went through for precisely moments like these. And it's why Israelis like the historian Yuval Noah Harari say to American and worldwide Jews, we're further away from the pain here. So we need to hold on to that vision when they can't, when they're scared, when they lose it. He says, you who are far away, you hold it for us. Remind us what's possible. And if we bring it back here to our home, I'm encouraged by people in this community who wake up every single morning and who fight for the hard-won progress made over the last 60 years in this country to make the we, the people in America, real. I'm encouraged by the people fighting for reproductive freedom and environmental sustainability and public health and the rights and health care of LGBTQ people and the existence of trans people and for immigrants and for democracy itself. I'm encouraged by people who are planting trees and tending community gardens, people who are AA sponsors and Little League coaches and big brothers and mentors, people who are running for local office, who participate in, as Jenny was describing earlier, trauma-informed community safety and violence prevention, people who pick up trash they didn't litter, people who smile and make eye contact with service providers and service workers and baristas and strangers who volunteer in soup kitchens, who invest in the arts and nonprofits, who are fighting the good fight and doing what we can, where we can, to try and remind ourselves of the foundational values of who we are when we're at our best. Neighborliness, kindness, care. I'm encouraged by everyday people who speak with respect and nuance, even though the algorithms reward bombast and outrage. Against the backdrop of echo chambers, that on social media and in the news we consume and in almost every realm of life that used to happen in the public square and now happens online, mostly alone, I have to say, even what we're doing here right now, davening in a synagogue where we know that we may disagree even vehemently with the person sitting next to us or maybe even the rabbi, that is an act of countercultural triumph of democracy building. And it still feels like we have to do more. More than we're used to, more than is in our comfort zone to resist the forces that are threatening to close down our hearts, our very humanity. In 1961, I'm sure many of you know this, Professor Stanley Milgram wanted to understand how everyday Germans could capitulate to the Nazis so easily. They were in such an advanced, civilized society, the pinnacle of European civilization. So he hypothesized that there was something unique about Germans that was susceptible to capitulating to authority. And he wanted to test his theory, but he couldn't get permission to do it in Germany. So he did his experiment on the campus of Yale University. Researchers wearing white lab coats told subjects that they were in an experiment about learning and that they were to ask questions of somebody on the other side of the wall, and when those people answered questions wrong, to give them a little shock of electricity. And the voltage would increase with every additional question they got wrong. The subject obviously didn't know. The voltage was not real. The people on the other side of the wall were actors. Okay, so nobody got hurt. Milgram observed that almost all the subjects in the experiments expressed initial discomfort at what they were being asked to do, especially as the voltage increased and the person on the other side of the wall yelped, banged on the glass, groaned, and eventually thudded to the floor. But when the experimenter pressed them and said, "Please go on. The experiment must continue. You have no other choice but to continue," ultimately, they continued, and 2/3 of the people did everything they were asked to do, including killing the person on the other side of the wall. In the end, Milgram wrote, "After doing the study at Yale, I saw so much obedience, I hardly saw the need to take the experiment to Germany." Psychologists have run many different versions of this experiment over the years to see what might mitigate the results. People are more obedient if the experimenter is wearing a lab coat or a uniform. People are more obedient if the experimenter assures them that they bear no personal responsibility for what happens to the person on the other side of the wall. But if the subject understands that this experiment is a moral test on which they are being evaluated, suddenly they act very differently. They don't comply with orders. They speak up, they walk out. Abraham had 10 trials, and we too are tested over the course of our life. And just as Abraham did not know which of his moral conundrums were tests, neither do we. In 10 minutes, give or take, we're going to chant the haunting words of Unatana Tokef, calling to mind the image of each one of us standing before the judge in divine judgment. And the theory of Rosh Hashanah is that we are standing before a judge, even if it's just the judge in our own head. And if we don't know which one is the test, then we will always think to ourselves, maybe it's this one. Oh, maybe this one's the test. And if we always sense that this one might be the one that really matters, we will actually start to live differently and to listen to our conscience and to expect more of ourselves even when it's hard. We'll take a breath before responding in anger. We'll treat everyone like they're human, worthy of the same dignity and safety and freedom that we value. We'll fight to protect the institutions that protect all of us, even when it's uncomfortable. And you might even take a risk, whether for folks in your own family or for somebody far beyond your family, because at the end of the day, we are all family. We can stand up for ourselves as Jews, and we can stand up for others as Jews. This should not be controversial. We can wake up in the morning and decide to live our lives as if our choices, our hope, our integrity makes a difference. Because it does. So I am telling you, to quote my own rabbi, Sharon Brous, moral conundrum ahead. You will be tested. We all are. So I want to bless us today, on the first day of this new year, that we accept these choices that are before us, these tests in the year to come, and we rise to meet them for the benefit of us, for our people, and for all creatures on this fragile, interconnected little planet of ours. May you be inscribed for health and for life in this year to come. Let all this be so. Shana Tova. Amen. Let's sing. Thanks, everybody. Wow.